And then one student actually came up at the end of a leadership conference. There were 400 students there. And he kind of stood back, and then he came up to me and he said, "John, what you just shared, I think will change the trajectory of my life." What I didn't know was that 2 years later, him coming up to tell me that actually changed the trajectory of my life.
Hey, welcome to Wealth Beyond Riches. Today's guest is a leadership coach to CEOs and executives. He left an 18-year career at Arthur Andersen to launch into his own journey as entrepreneur, speaker, writer, and coach to thousands of leaders around the world. His name is John Blumberg, and he has spent the last 28 years going deep on the idea of integrity. In a society that says, take care of yourself first, John's going to talk to us about reframing our lives around what we can give to others instead of what we can get for ourselves. How to unleash the flow of integrity and generosity from our core that brings beauty and meaning to the world around us. Friends, I think this is a really timely message for anyone who's questioning where they're at in their career, who's maybe contemplating the next season of work like retirement, or wondering how to become a better leader. Given the barrage of information that the algorithms throw at you, this could be one of the most important conversations you listen to this week. Also, be sure to check out the show notes for a new assessment from John that allows you to take the next step in your leadership. It is version 1.0, and you're going to be one of the first to be able to access it. Hey, if you're new to the show, welcome. This is not another finance podcast on getting wealthy faster. And it's also not self-help. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about finding true purpose and meaning by reclaiming our relationship with work and money. My hope for you is that you hear something that moves your life 1% closer to your true purpose and design for whatever season of life that you're in. This is going to be good. John, thanks for being here. You know, one of the funny things about you and I talking is you're the closest guest that I've ever had on a podcast because we're neighbors in real life.
Exactly, which makes us very close.
Yes. And, you know, so I was just thinking about this. My family got to meet you and Cindy first before I did. You guys came over to our house. This was 8 years ago. I don't know if you remember this, but you came over, you brought nothing bundt cakes, which was a huge hit for our young children at the time. And so this is how my wife recalls the story. She was like, so the couple from across the street came, and he is really gregarious. He just was so excited, and he kept talking. And his wife was like, John, we gotta go. Just leave them alone. Just give them the thing and go. And she's like, he just kept talking, and he was so excited. So that was and you left your cell phone numbers and a picture. And anyways, that was just such a generous welcome to the neighborhood, and that was my first impression of you. So
I remember that moment, Tim, and that was our typical rhythm. John, we got to go.
I love it. I love it. And then I think one of our second encounters was actually digitally on LinkedIn. It was during COVID, and I posted some video as we were all trying new things at that point in our lives. And I posted a video, and you wrote me this really kind, direct message that said, hey, I have you ever thought about public speaking? And that was really cool because I had thought about it at the time, but no one had called that out for me until you did. And knowing your background as a speaker and writer and leadership coach, I was like, wow, that's super cool.
I will say this, Tim, I never say that unless I absolutely believe it. So I mean, I do, and I think sometimes you can just see it within somebody. It's not always in the way that they deliver. It's more about the whole being. I think one of the things that's so beautiful to do is when we see a gift inside someone is to call it out. I one time heard this idea that the four most important letters in the alphabet, when they're put together, is I see in you. And I just think that, and I always take that seriously. I don't ever say that, particularly on that specific I see in you, unless I think, wow, I think there's something there. So, and fortunately, that's how I actually eventually started my journey, was that, people saying that. So I think I know how important that can be. Or maybe it can totally misguide somebody. I don't know. Right? But that's for you to deal with. So
yeah. Yes, but you have to take that chance and be courageous and go, hey, this is something I see because that person, they can only see with their own self-awareness and the people around them. So I really appreciated that. I actually I know when I went to do a talk for one of the first times, you were one of the first people I reached out to. And I was like, John, I'm getting our clients together and we're celebrating their collective generosity. And I want to talk to them about that. And I want to encourage them in that. And I want to weave stories in what do I do? And we met for coffee, and you gave me really like a 90-minute masterclass on public speaking and story creation. And that was just huge for me. You know, that was an inflection point, making it an okay talk to hopefully a good talk. And that was huge.
Yeah, it was a great talk, I would say. And you were kind enough to invite me. And so I actually got to see it. And it also showed there's a woman, Naomi Rhodey. She was in the late 90s, was the national president of the National Speaker Association. And every year every president had a theme. They don't necessarily do that anymore, but they did. And hers is the only theme that everybody remembered. And it was called The Privilege of the Platform. And what she meant by that was that every time you get up, it's a privilege to you to be in front of everyone else. Everyone's giving you the gift. And what I love to see is when people take that privilege seriously, which is exactly what you did. You spent the time, you engaged, you got ready for it, because it isn't about you. It's about the gift you give to others. And it was a perfect example from our coffee to the time I saw it delivered that's exactly what happened in that situation, which didn't surprise me, but it's still always great to actually see.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for that time investment in me and wisdom investment. That paid massive dividends for me. And then the next talk I didn't have to ask for your help. So
there you go. You're off and running.
Oh, no, I definitely needed it. That was a time constraint at that point. So, John, tell me about, you talked for a second there about like someone calling out something in you. You had a pretty significant career transition 25, 30 years ago. Talk me through that.
You know, it's interesting. I actually started as far as my studies. In fact, I remember as a junior in high school, I took an accounting class and I thought, ooh, I like that. And I think part of the reason I liked it, because everything had a place, every debit, every credit, it was organized, there was an answer. And so I went on to college and ended up majoring in accounting, graduated, went to work for Arthur Andersen, got my CPA, and was in audit for 5.5 years. And I decided at that point to shift my focus from numbers to people, and became a student of the human condition in this extremely high performing environment. And so it was a great lab to study, but the bulk of my 18 years at Andersen were really focused on the human side. And in my later years of the firm, which is why I got to Chicago, I was tapped to go into a firm-wide role and to help direct our recruiting worldwide. And in doing that, I just had the chance to speak all over the world. It just came with the position. And in doing that, I started speaking in lots of different environments, lots of different cultures, and also spoke at our student leadership conference. And this was the environment that I most noticed was that I loved when I had a chance to get up to speak. And I spoke on this. I'd hate to see a video of those today, but I spoke on getting a vision for your life was my topic. But a lot of people would start coming up after and saying, wow, you're pretty good at this. And then one student actually came up at the end of a leadership conference. There were 400 students there. And he kind of stood back, and then he came up to me and he said, John, what you just shared, I think will change the trajectory of my life. And I thought, holy cow, wow, what an amazing thing. What I didn't know was that 2 years later, him coming up to tell me that actually changed the trajectory of my life. Because I finally decided, you know what? I think I would love to go do this, but I was in this firm-wide role, significant pay. I love the firm. I love the team. It was the most ideal job for me. And in the midst of that, the hardest thing to do was to walk away from it. But for whatever reason, which I think I know exactly, is I sat in that same room that the guy had come up to me and it was 11 o'clock at night at another conference, and everybody had gone back, and I was preparing for the next day all by myself. And I just really had this spiritual experience that said, do you want to stay at Arthur Andersen? We'll do great things there, not knowing the whole firm would implode 5 years later. Or do you want to go on an adventure? And I remember asking, what is this adventure? And what I really felt was, I can't tell you because you couldn't take it right now. And it was only probably 20 years later that I realized what that meant. But there was this felt like it was a calling that was requiring me to leave everything behind. And fortunately, my wife, Cindy, has just been a saint the entire way. But a lot of people, when you have 3 children in the 5th grade and younger, and saying you're going to walk away from your firm-wide role at Arthur Andersen, you don't have a gold medal or anything to go, start your speaking career on. But she said, if this is what you want to do, let's go for it. And she never let up on that. She never put pressure on when the years were leaner. And so for me, that transition put me on a mission. And it was 5 years later when Arthur Andersen imploded that the name in the marketplace was golden until it imploded. Then it was a liability. And it was actually there that I probably learned more in the next 2 years. Fortunately, having some really great mentors in the speaking industry around me. But that's where I went from being on a mission to learning, well, you also have to be an entrepreneur. This isn't all going to be given to you. And so it was kind of amazing how it transpired over time. It's even more amazing how it evolved. And now that you look back, there's so many things that you can see along the way that you don't necessarily see going forward.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. I think it's a unique one, John, because I think about most people, especially at a large accounting firm, I would say that you tell me, but my gut is the typical person there is there for 30, 40 years. And now in today's day and age, it's probably more like people are at jobs for 2 to 5 years and then they're switching up what they do. What in your book, Return on Integrity, which, by the way, thank you for walking over a copy last week so I could take a look at it because of it must have been the tech issue, the cyber issue that we had online. So this is July 2024 that we're recording, and you went to order stuff on Amazon and all of a sudden it's taken a week for everything. So anyways, I texted John and he said, hey, he's just showed up at the door with 2 of his books. So there's a chapter there on drift. And I think this is so timely right now for anybody. There's so much coming at us in our career, in our family, in kids' sports, in our jobs, that we often are just finding ourselves drifting into the next thing. How'd you escape that in that moment? Like, what drew you to the adventure instead of the cush drift of, well, it's easier just to keep doing what I'm doing than to change gears?
Yeah. I don't exactly know, and remembering back in my mindset, it's probably a different story than I probably was experiencing at the time. But what it felt like is this is what I'm wired for. And there was even when I was in my years at Arthur Andersen, I was very selective in my career journey to sometimes turn down what might have been more lucrative or what everybody else would have done, to look at where could I make the greatest contribution to the firm? Where could I bring the most value? Now, fortunately, there were others that saw that value in me as well. And so, but this was a pattern that I had. So even the people that I was working most closely to when I decided to leave, it didn't necessarily surprise them because they knew that I had this pattern of where can I most use my gifts. The part that was different there was that to do this was going outside the firm, a firm that I can't tell you how much I love the firm. Because of that, and because I was helping direct our recruiting worldwide, there were people in the firm that were shocked when I decided to walk away, like, Blumberg, you're leaving the firm? And I mean, it's like you cut my wrists and the firm would flow out of it, right? I mean, I was a big believer in the firm and a big believer in, otherwise I couldn't have recruited people into the environment. So it was having to leave that behind and really believe this is what I need to go do. And I think a lot of times, I think you name it correctly, it's easier to stay in the comfort of what I know rather than go on to the adventure of uncertainty. And there's nothing to say that that was going to work out. And I'll tell you, 5 years in, when the firm imploded, I remember calling my buddy Kevin Freiberg. He's like my twin brother of a different mother now, but he was really my first mentor. He wrote a book about nuts on Southwest Airlines. Great book. Him and his wife Jackie have now written 11 books. But I remember in that moment talking with him, and he said, John, I know what you think. You just need to work your tail off to climb out of this situation. He said, I think you just need to fall, and this is exactly what he said, fall into God's loving arms. You were called into this, and you're on a mission to carry out what you've been called to. And it changed everything for me. There was almost an acceptance of this is the path, and the path isn't always going to be easy. And the path is going to be filled with uncertainty. And I think the biggest thing for me, Tim, is that it taught me such a powerful lesson not to push away uncertainty, not to run from the unknown or the mystery, to just keep going in it and have confidence that you will be able to, walk through this. People that would have known me growing up would have been shocked that I would have actually made these choices along the way. In fact, a high school buddy of mine about 10 years ago said, it was talking about the work I did in professional speaking. And I said, if I could have seen my life when we were in high school, it would have terrified me. And he goes, are you kidding? You were emceeing the pep rallies in high school. What are you talking about? But sometimes we don't see that. And so oftentimes we're equipped for something that we've been equipping for a long time, but we won't do it because we're afraid of the unknown. And there was a lot of unknown, and there remained to be a lot of unknown. There was a guy that had a big HR job actually here in Naperville, and we met for coffee because he was thinking about the speaking thing. And I've been doing it maybe 13 years at the time. And he says, John, when does it quit being scary? If I leave behind this big job, when does it quit being scary? Quit being scary. And I looked at him and I said, you're not going to like this answer. Never. But the difference is you get comfortable being uncomfortable. So I do think, though, and I'm just as guilty of it, and I still stay just as guilty, and just pick the category of where you stay comfortable rather than going on the uncomfortable journey.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what I heard there was, one, you have a spouse who's really supportive and on mission with you. I love that quote you said. What got you through the transition is it put you on mission to something. Mm-hmm. And so often I think we stay in the comfortable because it's not a high calling and it's kind of easy. But to take I'm reading this book called 2X or 10X is better than 2X by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And he's talking about this idea of moving into your unique abilities. And that requires courage and commitment. Mm-hmm. And to step into that adventure requires both of those things.
That is really true. And I think there's a couple scenarios. I used to always tell our staff at Arthur Andersen, always, if you're going to decide to leave, always leave when you're running towards something, not running from something, because it gives you more confidence. So when I say it was so hard to leave, I was actually taking my own advice. If it had been easy to leave, it would have made me question. Here's the other thing I think sometimes what we do is we're running from something, and therefore we run to the wrong thing. We're running away rather than running to. And it's, I think, always a helpful discernment when you're trying in the midst of a transition. What is really beneath the surface of this desire to make a change? Am I running from or am I running to? And the running to doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be easy or it's going to work out, but something good is going to happen because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of that, something that in my day job, I don't host podcasts all day long, but we run an investment management firm for people who are close to retirement and thinking about that transition. And that's a huge one that we've never really trained for. And so that's why I thank you for sharing your story of even the mini career transitions along the way, I think we build up retirement into this huge thing. And in reality, we can look back and go, you know what, we probably made, over a 30 or 40-year career, there's probably 7 or 8 career transitions. Even if you're with the same company, there's different jobs, different roles that you're doing. And switching into retirement is, I think if we see it more as, okay, I'm transitioning into something new. Maybe it's at a new company, maybe it's a no company, but seeing it as that and going, there's going to be fear and uncertainty along the way could really help somebody. One of your roles, in addition to speaking and writing books, is I know you work with small groups of leaders and helping them define their core values and the core that what makes them truly them. But also you're like a coach to CEOs and executives. Talk to me about the people who are really nearing that retirement transition. What is it what are they encountering on the other side of that you're seeing as you're talking with them?
Yeah, so even my coaching of CEOs or top executives, I always say it's my unintended service line that I stumbled into because somebody wanted some help. And I tried to talk my way out of it because I didn't coach people. I don't even know how to coach people. And later he became a great friend. And I learned later with his personality, the more I tried to sell myself out of it, I was selling myself into it.
Right.
But it did put me in a position to say, I love this one-on-one. I was used to being in front of 500 or 1,000 people doing keynotes, and I love that. But at the same time, being one-on-one with an executive where all the doors are closed and they can actually speak more freely than a lot of times they can speak in those positions. And I love that. Over time, some of those people that I coached just became friends. And then, at some stage of life, they're people that you've known along the way that are retiring. And so I never did coaching on retirement, but there were people that I'd become friends with that were retiring. And I ended up in this role of, just being a companion or a friend. And what I found was the pressure in a lot of the world of the people I knew were in professional service firms, that they oftentimes have a required retirement age of 59, 60, 61. And I think it's a brilliant model because it keeps the pipeline open for younger people coming up, but it also forces them out the door while they're young enough to have another season of something. The problem is they're forced out the door early enough to have another season, which means you need to figure out another season. And everybody starts asking you, what is the season going to be? And my biggest fear is by the time they get to that threshold is that their life, especially in those firms, has been pretty programmed. It's a kind of a career path that's pretty set out. And all of a sudden, it's wide open. There's no script. There's no one way to go about this. And so what I'm always afraid of is they're going to make a decision too quickly to have an answer when people ask them, what is it that you're going to do next? And you don't owe that to anybody, right? You owe it to give yourself the chance to really step back and be intentional about what it is that you're going to do. And of course, I know in that world, having lived in it, that when you step away, your brain is operating in a certain fashion that a year later, it's going to rewire and it's going to be operating in a different fashion. And I bet now that we can literally see the brain, through technology and science, that if you took the picture of their brain on retirement day and a year later, of course their desires and things that they could see and what they may want to do could be totally different, that they may be very blinded to when they're first retiring, especially if they're trying to come up, or the ego is trying to come up with the perfect answer when one of their colleagues says, so what are you doing next? And so it's been interesting to walk alongside, and the ones that are, again, brave enough, and most of them don't need to work. And I understand that that's a position of privilege to be able to have the opportunity to have that time to think about it. But even there, they put pressure on themselves to make decisions because, again, not having a decision is an unknown. It's an uncertainty. So can you deal with that almost in a sabbatical type of approach rather than feeling like you have to have the answer? And probably for me, Tim, all of my work on integrity and the way that I've reimagined that concept has everything to do with where they are in that moment of this whole idea of understanding everything's connected. And if you understand that, you have an opportunity to look much more 360 degree and realize truly how much opportunity there is to connect with out there, but also how to discern 360 in here to come up with what is going to be the most valuable contribution that you can make in the next season ahead.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. And when you and I were talking on the patio a couple months ago, you mentioned that question of, it's that person, that man or woman who's getting ready to retire, or they did just retire, and they're playing golf with the same 4 people that they've been playing with for the last 5 years. And that question comes up, hey, what are you working on right now? What are you working on right now? And to say nothing and to be okay with that and to be comfortable with that, like that's the drift that everyone is going to fall into is, oh man, I need an answer. So I need to come up with something, when in reality, no one's requiring anything of you. And
right.
You don't have to come up with an answer. So I think
and I think of a buddy of mine from high school. My wife Cindy always laughs because you keep in touch with people from grade school, and I've moved to 5 cities. But actually, this one guy, we actually did go to grade school together, but he retired and he plays golf 6 days a week. But what's really cool about that is that he loves it, and there's this group of guys, there are maybe 30 of them, and I really believe that when Bobby shows up to that golf course, he's actually doing great work being in community with these guys and walking with these guys through life. And so it's just that, is it an intentional thing, or are you doing it because you think you're supposed to, or are you doing it because you aren't willing to actually dig deep enough to figure out what it is that I should be doing? And I would say for him, it is the perfect answer. And I believe that he brings good to the world in that little environment that he operates in, because he so genuinely and authentically shows up in that particular thing for him.
There's this theme, and it's one of my favorite themes to talk about, which is generosity, that's coming through almost every story that you're talking about. So, and it actually has to do not with generosity of money, but of time and wisdom and skills. And whether it was your career transition and going, what can I give next? And asking that question. I think that question is really wise. Rather than going, what can I get out of this next season? You're asking the question, what can I give? And in each and every situation, when Bobby goes to show up to the golf course, he's thinking, what can I give to this group of men? What can I give to this situation right now? And that's where we find true fulfillment, is in whether it's in our career or in our family or in the next season of life, is what can I give in this next season?
I think so much too, Tim, that in this whole idea of giving, is so much of that is found within the deep work that you do within, that it becomes so much easier, that the deeper I go within myself, the more I really understand my core. I think 2 things happen. One, you open the floodgates of giving, because everything is an opportunity to give, even if it's a smile at the barista at Starbucks. I mean, giving is an ongoing type of thing when you have a generous heart. But when you have connected to the core, it opens the gates for it to flow out. There's really not an effort that has to go into it, that it just naturally happens. But it does take doing some deep work within to be able to tap into that core. I know when I'm encouraging and facilitating people to dig to their core values, a lot of people just, they'll say even to me, John, you've been working on integrity and core values for 15 years. Can you just give me the list of the best 30 core values you've ever heard and let me actually just choose from the list, right? Well, there's no work there. It's a check the list kind of thing, but there's nothing of themselves that's within it. And I always compare that to digging like 100-foot water well. And what's really cool about that is the water is there, whether you're willing to dig it or not. You just don't get the value of the water unless you're able to dig into it. But I think once you do, the water flows and the giving flows and the generosity flows. And it shows up in lots of different ways in lots of different arenas. And maybe in some ways you're just so much more attuned to, it's that whole idea that I don't have to give. Wow, there's an opportunity that I get to give that is, I think, makes life a lot more wonderful for sure.
I feel like right now, John, I'm the soil and the bedrock that's keeping you from talking about one of your favorite subjects, which is integrity. And, we're going to put John's information in the comments and the show notes and stuff like that. And you'll see that his website is John Blumberg ROI. And ROI is not return on investment, though that'll be one of the byproducts if you read his stuff. But you talk a lot about the return on integrity. What caused you to dig 100 feet down on the idea of integrity? Like what made you so laser focused on that you would say, your friends say, oh, of course you're going to talk about integrity, Blumberg. What's going on?
Yeah, they say all roads don't lead to integrity. I said, oh, yes, they do. Yeah. So here's the thing, and I'll just be real transparent, is I always say that integrity found me. I didn't find it. And I mean that in a very serious way. Now, in a very flippant way, I'd say there are some days I wish it had found someone else. Because it's not the easiest topic to take to the marketplace for 1,000 reasons. But it really, and I couldn't see this at the beginning, but when Arthur Andersen imploded, it was very painful because of the Enron scandal in 2002. I can't tell you how painful that year was. I had been gone for 5 years, but it was my family. And you have this firm that took 90 years to build, and it took literally 6 weeks to completely implode internationally. And what I really felt, because it was so painful, and by the way, painful suffering in our lives is most often a gift because it allows you to rip away the veneer from your eyes to see things more clearly. And what happened for me there, and I really remember this, and part of it was probably the defense mechanism, probably part of it was anger and what was happening. But what I looked and said, this isn't about Arthur Andersen, this isn't about Enron, this is about all of us, that something is terribly wrong and we've missed something. And I was going to write this book called Our Dream at Risk because I really felt we were going to drive capitalism off the cliff if we weren't careful. And so that book eventually became a novel or a parable for busy professionals called Silent Alarm. And inside that is a story about a guy who has a terrible tragedy, and he learns 12 lessons as he recovers. And all of my philosophy in speaking and writing is I never wanted to write or speak where I'm telling you what you need to do. All I want to do is get you thinking. And once you're thinking, I trust you're going to see what you need to see. But one of these 12 lessons was values build value. And then there was a publisher that saw that really liked the book Silent Alarm. And he said, we'd love to do something with you. And about 4 years later, nothing moves quickly, 4 years later, he approached me and said, we want to do a book on core values. And it ended up being Good to the Core, Building Value with Values. And when I did that book, their branding was very tight word count. Like it was 8,000 words, which is like a long article. And who was it that said I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one? It's easier to write a long book, I think. But that was their model. I talked him into 10,000 words. But here was the problem, is when that book came out, the good thing was it put me in lots of conversations about core values. And that's before organizations, that was the topic of the day. Very rarely did you hear it talked about. What worried me is I had literally done what I feel like we always do on this topic, and that is just talk about it on the surface, almost the veneer of the topic. And there was a part of me that felt, I have done a disservice. I haven't done a service. So I said, I'm going to go back. And it isn't that book, I mean, lots of people, there's thousands of those books out there that I think actually do a really good thing, but they don't do what really needs to be done. So that's where I decided I was going to write this book and try to redefine or reimagine the ROI in a CEO's mindset. That it is not about return on investment. It is, but it's not just about return on investment. It's about return on integrity. So I was going to write this book in a year, and 4 years later, I finished the manuscript. And I'd like to say that it wasn't procrastination. I kept thinking, you're not far enough. You're not deep enough. You got to go further. You got to go further. And eventually, 4 years later, what really happened was I thought there's no bottom to this. You can keep going forever. At some point, you got to draw a line in the sand and at least put it out and then keep going further. And that's exactly what happened. So I wrote it for the leader at the top. And then there was a leader at the top that said, well, but what do I give my people? This was written to me, which was nice that they realized that. It was their job. It was their responsibility. And so I ended up writing one that was for everyone. And really what happened to me was I thought, if the leader at the top doesn't get this and believe in it and own it, there's no hope in an organization. And I got too laser focused on that. And what I realized as I began to write the individual version of the book is that's not true. Integrity can plant itself anywhere for any reason in any environment on any day through anyone, and it began to grow from there. I think the other thing I discovered in it was that we treat integrity as this moralistic, black and white, judgmental. We treat it like it's this object, like I have integrity and that person doesn't, or this person does, and which, by the way, is very judgmental. It's very arrogant. And when we do that, we're violating our own core. And what I realized is that there is no such thing as having integrity. What it is that we live in some degree of integrity every single day in every single relationship, in every single decision. And what's beautiful is integrity won't let you have it. Is you have to keep coming back to the well. You have to keep coming back to it to be able to live in the essence of it, because we're all drifting. And so therefore the question is, are we continually coming back? And so I've tried to dispel this idea that integrity is defined by honesty and what you do when no one's watching. I get that's the conventional wisdom, and those are certainly lagging indicators of integrity. But I have often said that integrity is not defined by what you do and no one's watching, but what you do and no one's watching is defined by your integrity. It's a flip of the words, but it changes everything. That this idea of integrity is about being whole and entire, undiminished, integrated. And it's really mostly, I always tell people, if you can think of integrity synonym as connection, it's always about connection. That wherever there's division, you can always bet very quickly behind it is going to be a lack of integrity. And so this is where I tried to go much deeper into it. And the truth is 15 years later, and I think it was Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outlier said, when you've worked on something for 10,000 hours, I don't know if he calls it an expert, but he draws the benchmark there. Not that there's anything scientific other than if you've done it that long. I've way past it. And what I realize is the more I understand about integrity, the more I realize I don't know. There's just so much more to be explored there, which for me is the great adventure of it.
I love that, John. That's really good. And I benefited a ton by reading the book over the weekend. The one for the leader at the top is a great read. I want to read this part from the chapter on drifting. It's chapter 2. You have a great quote that you probably have memorized at this point, but it said, "We don't go running away from our values. We go drifting away." These are John's words, not mine, for anybody listening. "And one day we wake up in a place we never meant to be, drifting in a direction we never would have chosen." And I think that's just, that's the power of society today. Is there's a lot of not truths, but there's a lot of probably lies that we believe, that we should be a certain kind of person, or we need to look like this person in order to be successful, or this is what success looks like. And your work of, the first 2/3 of this book are really helping a leader define their own personal core values so that they can live out those core values in the organization that they're running. so that the people who work with them on their team have deep and meaningful work that's not mechanical, but this is all your stuff. So if for anyone listening, this is John's brain that I'm just repeating back, but to not do mechanical work, but deep, meaningful work that's about connecting with other people and what can I give, bringing that attitude to different things. And then the last third of the book, which I think you said in here you didn't want to write, is, guys, it's the roadmap for everything. For how do I define my own core values? What's the exercise around that? How do I then implement it with my team? How do I review it on a regular basis? So there's a ton in here that a leader could go from zero. You can actually go from zero to hero, not with most things, but in this book, it's all mapped out. So I thought that could be really valuable for any leader who's looking to grow deeper in the truth of who they are. And for you and me, this is a spiritual thing. It's like, what has God wired us to do? Like, we were created for good works. We were created to serve and love those around us and to create meaningful impact in other people's lives. And I know for you, that has to do with you're helping leaders develop, and that's impacting more people. That has a multiplicative impact to it. For us, it's leading clients into not financial security, but financial freedom to go, hey, I have more than enough, to be able to acknowledge that and to live in the fear of, you know what, it's not guaranteed, but my next chapter of life is more about what can I give than what am I going to get. And that shift is really crucial for anybody. So anyways, thank you for the book, and thank you for how you got deep into that. I'm curious, thinking about this idea of integrity, and I remember my dad saying, integrity is what you do when nobody's watching. What if you had to define it for everybody? Like, how would you define it?
Yeah, so I really come back, and it's words that I really leaned into when I first started, and it's just really these words of being whole and entire and undiminished. That integrity is when everything is connected. If you think about those three words, it's integrated, that everything is connected. And then it really does come to this idea of connection, that we're wired for connection, not to just certain ones, but to everyone. And I really think about this journey when a leader goes on this, it kind of is full circle back to where we started, Tim. And I haven't thought about this before, but it's this idea of many people won't start the journey. It's easier to think about it as honesty and what you do when no one's watching than it is to actually begin to go deep into the journey. I think there's lots of reasons why we don't, because when you start down the road and you start digging, there's uncertainty there. There's confusion. In fact, I tell people, when you start digging, I'm just going to warn you, you're probably going to wish you'd never met me or read this book. It gets to be quite a mess. And the beauty is within the mess. It's very paradoxical, but the beauty is within the mess. So I would define it with this idea of being whole. In fact, so much so that lately I've really been leaning into this idea of maybe what I've been working on all along has been wholeness. In fact, when I wrote the individual book, I actually was going to name the subtitle of the book because we wanted to keep the Return on Integrity brand. So it's just the subtitle that was changing, which, by the way, for any author that might be listening, don't ever do that. Just rename the whole book because it gets confusing. But I wanted the subtitle that is actually now The Individual's Journey to the One Essential Thing, which is great. And I believe that to be true because integrity is the one thing that touches everything. But what I really wanted was the title to be The Individual's Journey to Wholeness. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, said, I just feel like it might sound too soft in the marketplace. But it is the truth. And I would suggest, and I've long quit apologizing for things like integrity where people say, oh, that's the soft stuff. I said, yeah, that's your defense mechanism because it's the hardest thing you will ever be required to do as a leader. which then actually in many ways, if you think of integrity not being defined by what you do when no one's watching, I think from a leadership standpoint, you ought to be worried about your integrity is defined by what you do when everyone's watching. And that is where the manifestation of your integrity will either have value or your lack of it will have a detriment. But the question is, do you understand it deep enough that you really have connected to your core? And that's why the book started with their own journey, which just says, if you're reading this book, don't think you're going to do anything in your organization for at least 6 months, because it's going to take you that long, if not longer, to figure this out yourself. And there are a lot of things, I think, Tim, that we can lead that we don't have to have experienced.
Yeah, you even talk about like the PR side of things, that how organizations are getting so good at spinning the story of what's going on that they start spinning the story inside of themselves and telling themselves things that aren't 100% true, which we know is a lie, and how harmful that can be for the person to start believing things that are mostly true and living that out. That can be a real struggle.
Yeah, it can be a real struggle, and it's amazing. And that is the drift. And it's certainly in many cases, it actually is understandable how that happens with all the pressure that are on executives and metrics and measurements, that it's understandable that that happens. But if we're not grounded enough to see the drift as it begins to happen, we really do start believing what is not true. And that's incredibly dangerous, because what we're really seeing, we believe to be true. And I think oftentimes when a leader doesn't bring trusted advisors around them and really listen to them, I think that's a lot of times why we see people in key positions, whether they're a mega pastor or the CEO of a large company or entertainment, whether it's a football player or a musical star, is people that are most tightly around them don't want to get kicked out of the inner circle.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about leaders being highly visible, but also at the same time isolated and insulated. It's a phrase a good friend of mine, Brad Lomenick, has shared with me that's just really impacted how I think about leadership and making sure that who are those trusted advisors in my circle? And am I regularly asking them questions that I don't want the answer to because they can see something in me that maybe I'm blind to myself? How do we as leaders fight against isolation and insulation?
Yeah, I think you just named it. And I, in the book, actually use the term drift catchers to define drift catchers in your life. And drift catchers, oftentimes, have you ever been talking with somebody and you're not sure they're understanding what you're saying, and you just touch base, say, you get my drift? We want people to get our drift. What we need is people that catch our drift and bring us back. And I always say those people are people, once you've defined your core, you know what your core is, you share that with them in the way that you understand that. And then you just say, if I'm ever drifting, you have complete permission to call me out on it. And I always say these need to be people that love you enough, and I mean love exactly like I say it. They love you enough to tell you the truth, and you love them enough to accept the truth when they tell you when you absolutely don't want to hear, what they're trying to tell you. And by the way, they may not always be 100% correct, but it will open a conversation that creates an awakening in actually both parties. Because everything can become a teachable moment. But I think that insulation and isolation, they really, what's the term? It's lonely at the top. That is literally can be very true. Yeah. Is that they live in this role, and so therefore they have to put on the veneer. They put on the protection. They're afraid to be vulnerable, and certainly Brene Brown has done an enormous amount of work on vulnerability, which has been beautiful work, that the strength comes in the form of the vulnerability. But I think oftentimes we're conditioned in those positions to be able to keep this armor on so people can't get to you. And if they can't get to you, of course you're alone.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I'm going back to earlier when you were talking about your own story and being comfortable in the uncomfortable, knowing that your friend asking you the question, hey, When will I not be afraid anymore? And also there's this pressure that we need to be completely equipped for the role that we're in right now. And, I think of the quote, God doesn't he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called.
Yes.
And if you're called into something, if you're moving into something on a mission, then you will get the equipping along the way, and no one's expecting you to have all the answers.
Yep.
But we live in a society where we have all the answers at our fingertips. We think we have all the information. We don't have the wisdom. And what you're talking about is deepening wisdom around who you are as a person, who you are created to be, and then living that out to benefit others, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think part of it too, Tim, a lot of people think, oh, if you do this core work, then everything's going to be wonderful. In fact, when I wrote Return on Integrity, the best I can remember when I was writing the leader version is the whole first third of the book is dilemma. It's the problem. And I think part of my mind, that's what I was thinking. This is the problem. And if we can fix the problem, then integrity will flow like a river. And I just don't believe that to be true. Now, dilemma is a problem, but it's not just a problem. It's a great gift that we have, is that when we're in all kinds of circumstances, that we don't run from it. We equip ourselves to be ready to walk through it. And that's where the greatest development actually will come. It's in the dilemmas that I actually learn what my integrity is about. But I've got to do the deep work to be able to put us in a position to go there. So the great mystics of centuries ago would say it doesn't change what you see when you do the deep work. It changes where you see it from.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. You talk about one of the things that a leader can best do in finding the core values being defining when is enough enough. And so even speaking specifically about finances, how would you coach a leader through answering that question for themselves?
Yeah, this is a really important thing. I actually saw it on the cover of a Fast Company magazine in the 1996, I think. And I can still picture that cover. I don't know why, but it really hit me that if you can't define that, your drift is much more likely. And it has all kinds of ramifications of there is never enough because you keep moving the bar. I mean, if you go back to where you were talking about finances and your ability to give, I have more than enough. Well, how do you know if you have more than enough if you don't know what is enough? And so if we don't define that, it can be a creep of attachment and addiction. We tend to talk about addiction to drugs or alcohol or other things in life, but there is this really powerful addiction to money. And the reason it's so powerful is because it creeps up on us. Some people win the lottery, which of course it says ruins people's lives. Although I've always said I'd love to try to be the case study to see if we could have one example where it didn't ruin somebody's life.
Yeah, I know one. So they do exist.
They do exist. There you go. See, there's an exception to every rule.
Yeah.
But normally it's not a windfall. Normally, in fact, almost in many cases, if it is a windfall, and that could be an inheritance where somebody stumbles into a inheritance. But for most people in life, it's very slowly incremental. And therefore, we don't even realize that it's happening to us, that we're getting more and more addicted to money. And the way that we see money has got a bigger grip on us if we're not careful. So it can be a lot of arenas in life, but that is one of them where if we don't define enough as enough, we're going to always keep going for more. Let me be real practical about this one. I had a friend who was leaving a major career, and I'm just going to say he had millions in his bank account. I'm just going to, just for numbers' sake, let's just say he had 4 million or 10 million, somewhere in that range.
I'm a numbers guy, so I love making it very practical.
Okay. And he was thinking about, what do I do next? And he was in his 50s. And I could tell he had this pressure of finding a new job. And I knew, he was looking for his purpose, but I knew he felt like he needed to, keep building this nest egg. And I just looked at him and we're really good friends. We've known each other for a long time. And I said, the stress that I'm seeing around this right now, what that tells me is the nest egg that you built actually has no value. And if you begin to understand you don't need to do anything until you decide what exactly it is that you want to do, you haven't found the value within the nest egg. And I think a lot of times when we don't define what is enough, where enough is enough, we fall into that trap because we're always in a different relative point. And you're in a much better position to see example after example of where this happens, or where they actually have defined where enough is enough.
Yeah. And it's amazing to hear those examples. One, and I think these are helpful to share because we don't have enough of them. We only have what we see on the news and media and the story we write in our mind of what our neighbors are doing. Not you guys, but other neighbors. But, one friend just recently stepped out of a role. They sold their section of the business for multiple millions and looking at different opportunities to maybe continue to work for another few years, in their low 60s and wanting to continue to have an impact. And there's a couple things that they said, this couple, that I thought was amazing, and none of this, let me say it this way. One, they said, you know what? I've had offers of other firms like the one I used to work for, where it's like, hey, come work with us, make a couple $1,000,000. But he's like, but it's going to require 60 hours a week. And I just don't want to do that. I could do it. And it would take 3 to 5 years. I don't want to do that. And, he could also do some consulting, and that consulting business could give one of his kids career skills. It could be an asset that he passes to another one of his kids to lead. And so for them, that was their definition of, hey, this is when enough is enough. Now, does that dispel all of their fears about the future? No, it doesn't. It's like your work on integrity. It's a daily thing that they wrestle with and go, are we going to be okay? And when is enough enough? And it's not something that you ever have figured out, which I'm realizing you won't have it all figured out over time.
No. And here's the thing that is probably one of the great dilemmas, even with integrity, is the moment you think you have it figured out, you're lost.
Yeah. I think there's a huge parallel between integrity and generosity, and that it really gets to the core of who you are. And like you said, you can give and not be generous, but you can't be generous and not give. And so a truly generous heart is one that's saying, here is something that's of value to me that I want to give to you without expecting anything in return. And I think I still encourage people to give, even if they don't feel like being generous, because it is that growth process of going, you know what, I'm going to do this even though it doesn't feel right. And for a lot of people, there's some amazing generosity that happens around those retirement years where it's like, whoa, wait, right now is the time to, make a pre-funded endowment or do some big charitable gift. And from a tax standpoint, oftentimes there is, and that will catalyze a lifetime of continual giving. And that continual giving will grow the generous heart. I think it can come first, kind of like it's like going to work out. The first 5 times you're like, this is a terrible idea. I feel awful and I'm tired and I'm really out of shape and I don't like this. But 18 months in and you're like, wow, I feel better. This is good for me. Now I'm a person who exercises, not just somebody who knows they should. And I think whether it's integrity or generosity, I think can work like that too, where the action can come first and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, it makes me think too, whether it's in the work of generosity or whether it's working out or whether it's integrity, you go 5 times to work out and say, well, I don't see anything different. I'm just feeling horrible, right? It's also true on the work of integrity is that these are not short-term experiences. These are long-term. And if you're in it for the short term for the results, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you're in it for the long term is where you'll be amazed at the results that you get. And that's true at the gym or in your core or with your money as well. That's a great point.
And I love what you said at the beginning. If you knew it was 4, you probably would never get started. You'd be like, I can't commit to 4.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
But you did because you got started.
I'm just shocked that I didn't, force the issue on 1 year. And then all the voices start shaming you, right? You can't write this. You don't know anything about this, as opposed to saying you're just not done yet.
Yeah.
And how many things in life could be like that? And I want to differentiate between procrastination and actually having patience and humility to, know that this is you're not there. So there's no finish line that you can visibly see per se. So.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for your patience and persistence to keep digging on a very important topic that is not too often talked about. And that's really the idea for anybody listening behind the podcast is these are ideas that aren't really widely spread, and they need to be more widely spread. So, Mom, thanks for listening, and everybody else. I want to finish with two things. Number one, I'm going to read this from John, your book, Return on Integrity. And this is from the opening thoughts. This book is not as much about getting it right as it is about doing what is right. I trust that in doing what is right, you will certainly get it right. And then our second topic, generosity. It's not about getting rich. This book is about being rich. It's not about stretching for your highest goals. It's more about digging for your deepest treasures. It's not about saving capitalism, but it is about redeeming it. I don't know what the literary device is there that you're using. That's a bunch of opposites, but I love it because it's saying what this book is and what it's not. So if that entices you, we'll have the links to the books so you can check those out. Definitely worth checking out. Last thing, John, is one question that I love to ask is, what is one thing that you're loving right now? So often in life, we're stuck in that idea of the gap in the gain, and we're always looking at what's the gap, what's the next thing is, that's when I'll feel happy. But what's one thing you're loving right now?
Yeah, let me name one personal, one professional. The personal, there are 5 of them. They're called grandkids. I'm loving every one of them. And what I had a grandparent telling me before we were expecting our first grandchild, or our daughter was expecting our first grandchild, and that is, you're going to love grandparenting. And I said, oh, I know. And he goes, no, you don't know. No, you don't know. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I'm loving that. On the professional side, I'm starting a project that I'm actually trying to write a book without writing a book. And what I mean by that is, well, number one, I don't have to decide if it's 1 or 4 years because I'm not writing a book, but it's a prayer practice. I started during the pandemic to put thoughts out on social media every day, and eventually they evolved into whispers of integrity. And I think today's number 1047 or something like that. And these are not things I curate. These are things that I vulnerably pull from my soul. And some of them I absolutely think I know what I mean by it. Others I'm willing to be vulnerable with it. And so I decided to become a student of my own whispers. And so this project, I think, will eventually be called Whispers of Wholeness. And it's literally just a journey that somebody can go on. And if it's a book that, it's not one you just read cover to cover, you read a little bit at a time. But I'm excited, and this maybe is just for me. Maybe I need to be a student of my own work. Well, that's always been the case, but I'm just looking forward to becoming a student of what I put out there to see what really is this, and in my own way challenging myself to do what I ask everyone else to do, and that is to go deeper. And the truth is, no matter where you are, you can always go deeper. It's the gift of where you are. And so I've been delayed on starting this for some various reasons, but I'm actually next week, I guess, I'm going to start, and my rhythm is designed to do 3 a week, and we'll see. I don't want to push it. I don't want the outcome to define it, but I really am looking forward to this, and I think I'll love the process of it, and in many ways be humbled by, okay, you put this out there, value boy. All right, so what does this mean? And I think I'm looking forward to seeing how the Spirit moves through that. So I'm loving the uncertainty of what actually sits within all of that.
Yeah. I think the one thing standing in your way, John, just knowing you as your neighbor and friend, is probably your bushes that you're constantly pruning. That seems to take a lot of time. So
it does. we made the mistake of putting in this perennial garden, and the weeds don't know they're not supposed to be there. So I've also made that a prayer practice too, pulling weeds. So that's why you may see me on my knees out there. I'm just praying, Tim. I'm just praying. So
That's good.
But,
That's good. Oh, well, thanks for sharing that. One thing I'm loving right now is I got this new notebook. It's from a company called the Monk Manual, and they have a weekly version. And I've been using the daily one for a long time, where it's super old school. It's a paper planner where you write out what you're doing that day. You write down the top things of the day, things you're thankful for. And it's been an amazing practice. And I got to the point in, I guess, just where our company's at and family, that I needed to see the whole week at a time, and I needed to map it out. And so it's larger. It's a bigger book, and when you open it up, it has Sunday all the way through Saturday and a list of stuff for the week. And I've been doing it for 2 weeks now, and it's been very valuable. So for anybody out there looking to organize their week and have that time of quiet where you assess what's really important for the week, that's been a great tool for me. So, John, thank you so much for not just today. Today is a gift, and I've already been a recipient of your generosity with your wisdom and your time, because you do actually stop pruning your bushes and talk to me for great lengths, which if I was in your shoes, I would say, I don't have time right now. I look at these bushes. And it sounds like I'm saying something negative about your bushes. I'm not. It's your craftsmanship. But you've also put in years of investment into integrity and leading leaders into what is truly at their core. And going deep is not a popular practice these days. And I can just think of the hundreds and thousands of people who have been impacted by your wisdom and your leadership and your investment in them. So I know more people are going to reap the benefit of that from listening to this. And so thanks for that many years of investment before even getting to this point.
I appreciate it, and a joy to be with you today, Tim. And also, it's such a joy to be across the street from you and to see your beautiful family. It's just so life-giving to look across the street and see that you are living what you believe, and what a beautiful family you have.
Thanks so much, John. Awesome. Thank you so much for the time today. This was great. Hey there. If this episode impacted you, would you share it with a friend right now? That would mean a lot to me. And even better, if you could leave a review of the show. Maybe mention what part of this conversation stuck with you. On the first Tuesday of each month, we're going to bring you some more stories of great leaders who have learned what it means to be truly wealthy. If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to drop that on the first Thursday of each month. So keep an eye on that. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.